Hello, everybody. I'm Rick Dancer. Welcome to Get Real with Rick Dancer. On this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about President Trump was elected. Obviously, most of us all know that, unless you've been hiding under a rock. And that's opening some doors for people. And we're going to talk about who overwhelmingly voted in this election. And it was a lot of people in the rural areas. And we're going to talk with someone from the timber industry who represents the timber industry, and a little bit about what kind of hope does this give to opening up some better. We all know that the forest management in all over the United States, but especially in the Northwest, needs a little bit of looking into. And I recently heard Donald Trump on an interview with Joe Rogan talking about the timber industry. And I thought, oh, Nick, we need to get to this guy. he needs to understand. He understands the basics, but he needs to understand a little bit more. So we're going to talk to Nick Smith from Healthy Forest, Healthy Communities in just a second. But first, I want to bring our sponsors in. Dr. Bratlin loves these kind of conversations. He thinks everybody should be involved in what's going on around you, and you're not going to know unless you're educated. Montana Oral, offices in Butte, in Great Falls, in Bozeman, and in Helena. And the best thing about them is when you go in for treatment, they put you out. That's what I'm looking for in an oral surgeon. Also, Greg Hinkle, New American Funding. He's a mortgage broker. We're all hoping that housing prices get better and that the interest rates keep coming down a little bit and the economy straightens out. Maybe that'll make it more affordable for people to get into a home. And New Leaf Hyperbarics and Wellness Center, Matt McCarl, right there in Eugene. If you haven't tried it yet, go tell him you saw it on Rick Dancer. He'll give you a discount the first time. They have a big special coming up on Saturday. They call it Green Saturday. It's the Saturday after Thanksgiving where you can buy up a whole year's worth at a discounted price. And you can get 200 of them if you want to. So it's a really good deal. And Matt pushes this every single year. All right, let's get right to the topic. Nick, I'm going to bring you on, Nick Smith. It's good to have you.
It's great to be back, Rick. Great to see you.
Are people in the timber industry feeling a little more hopeful now that President Trump is going to be in the White House?
Well, I don't think it's just the timber industry. I mean, certainly we make up a really significant part of rural America. I think what you're seeing is that rural Americans are excited about the result. We saw during the election that rural voters came out in full force, and nearly 2/3 of rural voters in this election voted for President-elect Donald Trump. I think from a timber industry perspective and from the perspective of looking at the state of our federally owned forests, and in this age of severe wildfires, I think rural Americans are excited because for years they have pleaded for better forest management to protect their homes from wildfire, to keep their nearby national forests green and healthy, certainly to provide timber to support their local economies, and I think very importantly, to maintain safe access to their public lands. For the past, dozen, plus years, I think a lot of rural Americans were feeling that they weren't being heard. Certainly, during that period, Donald Trump was president and, did seek to make some changes. He just didn't have enough time during that term to accomplish, I think, great things for rural America.
Because especially like in Oregon, where you see this big move, I think rural voters in Oregon are so frustrated. You're seeing then this greater Idaho movement where people are wanting to go, okay, you know what, if you're not going to listen to us in Oregon, we want to become part of Idaho, where statewide, at least they'll listen to our concerns and see what we're doing. And I've been kind of flabbergasted because I'm real close to that movement. I've talked to those folks a lot, and they've been trying to get the governor of Oregon to sit down and meet with them, and she won't, which I find really interesting because it's like, if I had a huge section of my state that wanted to get the hell out of here, I think I'd want to have a conversation. And I think that's what you see in this election is people going, okay, You haven't listened to us for the last couple of decades. Now we know how to do this. We're gonna get up and we're gonna vote, and we're gonna get somebody in here who will hopefully pay attention to these issues that affect people in rural Oregon, because it's not just your agriculture industry. It's ag, it's cattle ranchers, it's there's a whole group of people out there with that businesses depend on better management of Forest Service land.
I agree. Here in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon and Washington State, I think there's just deep frustration, and you see that in the Greater Idaho movement. That really we are being governed by people in the big cities who don't share our values, who don't share our understanding of the environment and what needs to be done to conserve our natural resources. And they don't understand our ability to utilize our natural resources, whatever they may be, for the many things that people in the city depend on every day for their essentials. And so whether it's the Greater Idaho movement or other movements, politicians in the big cities, in the state capital, certainly in Washington D.C., need to start listening.
What do you do now, like as an organization, and you're involved with a lot of different people? How do you get that message to Trump? Because like I said, I heard him, and I'm not being critical, I'm just saying I heard him talking, and he understood the need for better management in this interview with Rogan. But you could tell he didn't quite, if you don't do this every day, and I think a lot of the people who live in Oregon don't understand. It's not a hit on anyone. It's just, I know now. I didn't know this stuff. I was a news reporter. When I started working with you guys on some stuff, I got educated, real fast.
Well, I can say that, President-elect Trump is very interested in addressing the wildfire crisis. During his first term, I was at the White House. I've worked with his first White House on some issues. President-elect Trump, may not understand, maybe the technical aspects of forest management and what that means and all of that goes into it. But he sees the need to reduce the fuel loads in our forests, because I think he understands. I think most people understand that, if you reduce the fuel, you can reduce the size and intensity of a fire. And so, I think that, even if, President Trump, isn't the most articulate when it comes to, forestry, that's okay. I think he understands the needs of rural communities. He understands, what needs to be done principally. And what he showed in his first administration is that he's able to bring in the people who know all of this stuff,
Right.
Who knows the policies and can get things done on the ground. In the first administration, I would say that his administration really struggled to organize itself,
Right.
and to put those people into key places. And then, getting people into the right places is just one thing. Then you have laws and regulations. And I think, one of the things from the first Trump administration is that they were not able to adequately tackle the regulatory state,
Right.
that dominates our lives. And they were able to get some changes towards the end of his first term. Of course, they were quickly reversed by Joe Biden. But I think what you're going to find in this second administration is that he's bringing in people quickly. You're already seeing that.
Isn't that, Nick? Have you ever seen? I was telling my wife, I don't think I've ever seen someone who just won president within a week fill cabinets and positions, and at least nominate. He's naming people this quickly. You can imagine. I can imagine him getting sworn in. He and Melania go home. He starts signing some executive orders, and then he goes to the ball. Then he gets up the next morning and just starts going at it, because he's got 18 months to really prove what he's going to do.
Yeah. Well, the president-elect and his team have been signaling for months that they are not going to make the mistakes that they made in his first term.
Right.
And, I just mentioned a moment ago that, they were slow to get people into place. Well, they're getting people into place. And I guess, to finish my thought is, okay, they get the people in place, and now they're going to start, taking hard looks at the regulations, and then ultimately working with this Congress, this new Republican Congress, to make changes to federal laws in order to implement that agenda.
So do you think the Chevron decision by the Supreme Court this will probably help them a lot? Because basically I was listening on the radio this morning, they were talking about this, and I'm not an expert on it, and I don't expect you to be either, but it sounds like, if the regulations were adopted by bureaucrats, they don't fall under the Constitution. If they were passed by law by the Congress, that follows the Constitution. So all those other ones are at risk, and I don't know which are which, but I'm gonna imagine there's a ton that affect the timber industry and cattle ranchers and people in rural America, that they're going to be. They said it was probably about 50% of the regulations will fall under this new look.
Well, geez, Rick, I mean, we could spend an hour just talking about the regulatory state. And I think one of the most significant accomplishments, if you will, from the first term was his ability to appoint judges. And during his first term, you really saw him make an impact in terms of judges on the Ninth Circuit, Court of Appeals, and other, federal courts, and of course the U.S. Supreme Court, which, has a conservative majority.
Right.
And since, President Trump left office, you saw, a number of cases where the Supreme Court has sought to clarify that only the Congress could make laws, not unelected bureaucrats.
Right.
And so you have the Chevron decision. You're seeing other very significant decisions, both at the appellate court and the Supreme Court, that deals with the regulatory state, what they can and can't do. Now the president, President-elect Trump is coming in with his team, and they seem very focused, and they know what they need to do to bring in their agenda. And it's going to be really interesting to see how he works with Congress.
How frustrated are the people you work with in the timber industry? Because what's basically happened is, we're no longer managing based on science. We're managing based on the litigation, and we have judges who, God bless them. I honor judges, but they don't know anything about timber management or the science behind timber management. And so you've got them making decisions about how our forest, and so far they're not working out all that well.
That's absolutely right, Rick. Forestry, forest management, particularly on federal lands, are not governed by science and what's right for the land. It's governed by politics and what's right for, whoever is in office. And unfortunately, we saw a lot of that after the last 4 years. You had, President Joe Biden, who, I think understood that, half the country is burning, in wildfires. And, they came up with, this grand wildfire strategy that said, okay, half the country is burning. We need to do something about it. We know that in order to address this wildfire crisis, we need to be reducing the fuels, whether in forests or grasslands or whatever, these landscapes may be. So they came up with a wildfire strategy that aimed to double treatments, forest health treatments, like mechanical thinning, other activities to reduce the risk of wildfire. And then this administration turned around and came up with things like this National Old Growth Amendment, which sought to make forest management on federal lands even harder. It reversed and in many cases imposed new regulations that made it more difficult to manage forests and reduce the fuel. So, the experience of the last 4 years is that, well, we kind of understand the problem. We're going to throw money at it. And, when Democrats dominated the federal government, between, 21 and 23, they passed over $10 billion in new government spending for things like hazardous fuels reduction and all of that, with all kinds of strings attached, which made that spending completely ineffective. And so, 4 years later, we've gone nowhere in terms of managing our forests, reducing the risk of severe wildfires. And it is an endless loop. And, the frustration that you're hearing from the timber industry or from rural communities in general is that we're simply not being heard. And there's a big difference between saying you're going to do something and actually doing it. And that is the frustration.
So if you were going to sit down with President Trump, and I'm assuming he hasn't called you to be the head of Forest Service yet, right?
He's not, no.
But let's just pretend you get to sit down and you could have his ear. And you obviously, I didn't know you'd been to DC, so you've obviously been in a position where you get to talk to these folks that are working with him. What would you say? What would you recommend to them?
I would say, Mr. President, we have an incredible opportunity. We have an opportunity to put America first by finally being aggressive about addressing this wildfire crisis. And in doing so, we can thin the forests. We can turn all of that material that really needs to come out of the woods and make American-made wood products, that are made by American workers, that provide real economic opportunities for our communities, for our states, and for our nation. This is a real win-win-win for America. And so by managing the forest, by putting, allowing our agencies to do their jobs and to thin the forests, we can have healthier forests, we can have healthier communities, and we can have a better America.
And what I think too people don't understand is when, one of the people that we talked to in Southern Oregon for one of our Truth About Timber show videos, I think she put it so eloquently. She just said, the biggest threat right now to the old growth forest is not logging, it's forest fires. So because of the lack of management, we're putting forests at risk. And then there's areas in there where there's new forests that are designed to become old growth forests that are beautiful, and they're in process, moving along the process, but they're uphill. Other ones are downhill. So we're not being consistent with our message, because if a fire comes in there, that old growth that we supposedly care about is going to be the first victim of the forest fire. So it's almost like, the environmental community tried for so long to protect old growth, and now they've done it, and now their very plans and fighting it in course is destroying it.
We've protected our forest to death.
Yeah.
Rick, you know Oregon very well. Obviously, Montana, both of our states have been ravaged by wildfire in recent years. And, the notion that you can draw arbitrary lines on a map and then just walk away and consider that success is a really self-defeating strategy. It is kind of based on the philosophy, maybe even a religion among some folks, that people do not have a role in nature. But, certainly that goes against, thousands of years of Native Americans, living in the forests, managing forests, producing all kinds of things from forests for their livelihoods. The old growth issue is a really good example, Rick. The lady you talked to in Southern Oregon knew what she was talking about, in that, the Biden administration, under intense political pressure, had to come up with some kind of policy that deals with protecting old growth. And so it directed its agencies to go through this multi-year process to define inventory, assess the threats to old growth, so on and so forth. And, what did that data say? What did the federal government find? Well, the biggest threat to old growth are not chainsaws, it's severe wildfire. And in areas where federal lands are actively managed, you actually see more old growth, because the forest is healthier, it's more accessible, especially for firefighters to get in there and do their jobs and contain a wildfire. Um, but the administration was setting itself up for a policy that, well, we need to do these treatments on these lands, but we're going to make it harder for our agencies to actually do it.
Because, what's interesting too is if we're thinking environmentally, which I think the timber industry always has and does, the employees that work and log out there play out there. That you're not going to destroy your playground or your backyard, the place where you want more wildlife so you can go hunting and doing the things that you love to do and feed your family and all that sort of thing. But I think when we're burning forests, allowing forests to burn or putting them at risk, the carbon that you're throwing in the air in one season of a forest fire, I remember this. I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but during the Labor Day fires in Oregon, I had read that the ones in Oregon, those fires in 1 week put more carbon in the air than pollution and Portland industries and businesses and all that. In 1 week, they did more than that happens in a whole year, just from one big forest fire. And it's like, if we really care about the environment and carbon, we got people getting carbon credits for stuff and all this other thing. And it's like, all that's just bullshit if you let the forest burn up. You know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Rick, this comes down to the sort of the fundamental topics of this conversation, and that rural communities have just been frustrated for a long time that they're being governed by people in big cities who have no understanding of how rural communities live, how they view the environment and nature, and are imposing policies that don't even fix the problems that they're worried about. And the Labor Day fires, the massive carbon emissions that you just described is a really good example. The urban cities, they want to tax us, they want to regulate us, they want to tell us what we can and can't drive. They want to rob us of our livelihoods and the ability to enjoy and live off the land. This recent election was a pretty strong signal that we're done with this, and it's time for a new direction. And the people in the cities who don't understand us, don't want to understand us. I think there are going to be some new voices in the federal government that want to change that.
I remember one of my favorite sound bites I ever heard. I was doing a story, and it wasn't even a controversial story. I was just in Eastern Oregon, a little town called Rome, and got a cattle rancher, and his wife was talking to me and said, Rick, we spend, hundreds of hours making man-made lakes out in the desert here for our cattle. And the elk and the deer prosper off of that. And those herds get bigger. And she says, no one ever talks about that, but they come out and tell me I have to fence off the Owyhee River so my cattle can't drink out of that, which they've been doing for 150 years. And she says, and then I go to Portland to fight this, and I stand on the banks of the Willamette River, encased in concrete and pollution and car shit going into the air. And I'm looking at this and thinking, and you're going to tell me how to manage my river? And I thought it was the most profound thing, because I think that's what's happened to rural Oregon for two to 3 decades. And this vote was a vote to say, we want our voice back. And we want to be part of a solution, not part of more BS and red tape that absolutely goes nowhere and just makes people look and feel good about what they're doing. It's all about, I feel like I'm environmentalist. So why don't you get your ass out there in the environment and really do something about it? Because I don't care how you feel. At the end of the day, it's how healthy is our forest. And I don't think there's anyone on the planet right now that would say the forests in America are healthy.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about the spotted owl for a minute. This gets to the very beginning of the timber wars, that ultimately devastated entire communities in the Northwest. There's this perception that, going back decades that, northern spotted owl habitat can only use old growth forests, right? And so we need to draw arbitrary lines in the map, say, well, we can't do any management here because, the northern spotted owl, needs this habitat. So, we took loggers out of the forest. We stopped managing the forests. What happened? Well, the northern spotted owl continued to decline. And not only did its populations continue to decline, but its habitat is burning up. We talked about the Labor Day fires, a little while ago. The Labor Day fires destroyed over 500 square miles of northern spotted owl roosting and foraging habitat.
So the very plan we came up with, designed to allegedly save the owl, actually destroyed its habitat.
Oh, and it gets worse, Rick. So, the federal government, imposes or has identified 9 million acres of federal land between Northern California, Oregon, and Washington as critical habitat for the northern spotted owl, meaning we can't manage these lands. Over 1 million acres of that critical habitat is not even northern spotted owl habitat. So they're setting aside land that the bird can't use, probably will never use, just for the sake of saying that we're protecting the environment for this species.
Well, didn't another plan or information come out that it wasn't really lack of habitat that was destroying the spotted owl, but and actually it was another owl called the Bart owl. And now the Fish and Wildlife Department is actually talking about, let's really inflame this conversation, murdering thousands of Bart owls to protect the spotted owl. I mean, this is just insanity.
Well, we've already killed, thousands of jobs. So, let's now kill a competing species. And certainly the barred owl is a major factor in the decline of the northern spotted owl. But, it's just another example of how natural resources environmental policy has no basis in science or what actually works. It is for, political purposes and re-electing, politicians in the big cities.
Well, and you put me onto this story on the grizzly bear too here in Montana. The grizzlies are coming back. I mean, there's too many of them in certain areas and not enough in a couple of areas. But this is like a huge. It's the spotted owl all over again. It's just meaner and got bigger teeth.
Yeah, grizzly bears are not hard to find in Montana.
No, and it's dangerous. And this, I know you know this already, but it's interesting. I'm learning a ton. It's also bringing the other wildlife because of the forest not being managed properly. Elk, deer. It's starting to hamper their development and bringing everybody. And now the bears are coming down into communities because there's so many of them. It's like it's insanity. So. You think that you feel like the Trump administration is going to be really open to listening to this and maybe finally get the Forest Service on a track where, and it's not really just the Forest Service. The rank and file ones, they know how they got the science. They know what they're doing. They're just trapped by the politics that rule the upper echelon of the organization.
Yeah, it really is, Rick, the DC swamp. Our public lands manager. Understand these landscapes, work on them every day. They live in our rural communities. They understand the needs of our communities. They know what needs to be done on the ground so that these lands can continue to be green and healthy for current and future generations. Donald Trump as a disruptor, going back to 2016 is intent on draining the swamp. And I think a big part of that is, and we saw this in pieces, during his first administration, giving states greater ability to do more management on federal lands. So you're seeing more of that. And it is, giving a voice to rural Americans, rural counties and others, and give them the tools and the resources to get the job done.
So are you saying that we need to manage the swamp first and then we can get to the forests?
Well, I think looking at some of the president-elect's picks, I mean, I think he's sending a strong signal that
Yeah.
he means business, and yeah, I think you have to recognize that. Boy, this incoming administration has a lot of issues to tackle, both here at home and abroad, and federal lands, forest management is a small part of that. But I think I'm confident that the president-elect, even if he can't accurately describe them, he understands these issues. He wants to tackle them. He wants to empower rural Americans. And, as I said earlier, this is a win-win-win. You have healthier forests, you have more uh, American jobs making American products, and one that, I think benefits everyone through healthier forests, through less wildfire smoke, through more access to our public lands.
I think the thing too, Nick, that we have to understand as these rural people and people in the country is Donald Trump is our what he's like the superhero in the front opening the doors. But we, the people, the Constitution, there's nowhere in the Constitution where it says we the president, we the Congress, we the, all these other entities. It's we the people who are in charge of our country. So we need to, what the last thing I'd have you tell people, what do they need to do? So rural America has spoken, they've opened their voices, but if we all now go back to our regular lives and just let Donald and his crew will do it, it's not going to happen. We have to be actively involved in this process.
You're absolutely right, Rick. The election every 2-4 years, that is our voice. That is how we use our voice, but it doesn't end there. We need to show up in Salem. Communities, healthyforest.org.
Nick, would you go back? We had a little freeze right there. Can you go back?
Okay.
We need to show up. Just go back and say that little bit again, because we had a little bit of a freeze on the video.
Okay. Yeah, my internet connection seems a little unstable, but I'll do it. Rick, you're absolutely right. The election every 2 to 4 years, is our chance to elect people to office. What we really need to do in the meantime is to continue to be in their ears, to understand the concerns that we have. In this case, the need to manage our forests and reduce wildfire risks. So, whether it's showing up in the state capitals of Oregon, Montana, Olympia, Washington, we need to be doing that. When our members of Congress are back home, we need to come to those town halls and we need to remind them, of the promises that they've made, and that they can't forget about us when they go back to Washington, D.C. And so one way folks can get involved is through Healthy Forests, Healthy Communities. We're on Facebook. We're at healthyforest.org. You could sign up there, and together we can make a real difference for our communities.
And you guys, I highly suggest you go to that website and sign up for Nick's newsletter, because it comes out and it has things. I just found stuff in there today that I was like, what? I didn't know that. And it's a really great place to keep involved. And it's not just about forests. It's about all kinds of things that affect rural America. I think people should really get on that. I always have people asking me, Nick, well, if I can't watch the news, where am I supposed to get my information? Okay, so I say, don't watch the news. Go to places like this and get the information from the sources that are giving you out the real information, the science, the facts. Don't rely on somebody else. Maybe that's what we learn from this. We don't need other people regurgitating things for us. We need to start listening to the people who are out there logging, the people who are working in the woods, the people who see the owls, who see the birds, who see the animals. They know what's going on. And our Forest Service and BLM employees, the scientists, the foresters who are out there wanting to do their job, but constrained by the same regulations that are strapping down all the rest of us.
Well, I think we know, especially in this election, where social media played such a big part in how people shared and consumed information, that we're seeing a continued trend of Americans losing faith and confidence in the traditional news media. And so where are they turning? They're turning to X. They're turning to trusted sources on Facebook to get a real idea of what's actually happening. So, yes, I think it's further reason to ditch the legacy media. Follow Get Real with Rick Dancer on Facebook. Follow Healthy Forests, Healthy Communities on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll get the real story.
Yeah. Nick Smith, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and talk about this. I think it's exciting. I think we're all ready for change. And wouldn't it be nice if in a summer or two, you don't have to plan your camping trip around a forest fire, and you know that your community is safe and that it's not going to end up one day looking like what the McKenzie River Valley looked like and the Santiam Valley after those fires came through, that we know that the priority in Oregon and Washington, Montana is to put out the damn fire first and look at the other stuff later, but get that thing out, because no more watching and waiting. It's time to just go in and do what firefighters do best, put out fires.
Let's get to work.
All right, Nick, talk to you later. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so there you have it. Go find your own information. Go look for this. But honestly, you guys, we can't. I see so many people going, "Oh, Trump, Trump, Trump," and I love Trump. I voted for him. I think this is the best thing ever. But what a good leader, and this, I think he would say this to you probably himself. What a good leader needs is people behind him. And so if you aren't going to those meetings when a congressman, whether they're a Democrat or Republican, comes to your community, and you're not going in and saying, "What are you doing about forest management? What are you doing about this stuff?" You have to be the antagonist out here in the public, asking the hard questions, because Trump can't do everything. He's representing us, but we have to also be his back. So that's your challenge. Take this, share it on your page, share it with other people. And thanks for watching. Let other people know what's going on. You really can do this. It's going to change. It's going to change.